Dynamic views. So it's nice to go around in an app and see static screens, but sometimes you need screens to have things that change when the user interacts with them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you a few concepts, and then we'll move on to actually applying them. Right? So the first thing we have, and you saw these in the menu maybe, is we have what we call variables, and we have what we call state. So you've seen now that logic blocks can take data, and they can return data. Same thing with views. So we have inputs and we have outputs. And both variables and storage behave a bit like storage. Variables and state behave a bit like storage. So you can use them while the app is running. But the difference with storage is that they don't get saved in device. So every time the app is restarted or the app launches, they are set back to the default value. So obviously there's a different usage. Variables are intended more for when you need to store something and then use it later when you're doing logic. This can be like, let's say you're building a restaurant app and you have a cart and you need to store the numbers to make the calculation later. That's what you could use it for. And how that differs from state is when a variable changes, nothing happens on views. It just changes and that's it, and you can use it somewhere else later. However, when we change a state value, this is different. This will trigger a change on the view. So this can be useful for building a view with things that change. So we'll be setting a state value, and then we'll be using that on a view, and you'll see that it changes. Yeah, so it's important to make the difference between the two. And some of the dynamic views that we can make with this are, for example, if you want to make a counter. I was saying that before, like if there's quantity items on a cart in a restaurant app or in like a ordering app, you can increment +1, +1, +1, -1, -1, and it will show it to the user. You could hide a component while something happens. So if I click the login button, there's no indication that anything is happening, but we could show something else instead. Or if you had a list of items, you could quickly add something in the item or edit the list, and the list would update right away. Okay, so let's build a little counter. In order to do that, it'll be similar to storage. I will create a state key first of type number to store the value I want to start with. Okay, and then I'll create a view and I'll use it inside. There's a small syntax for that auto completes. So we're going to be building this in here. So same thing again, to configure data. I went to storage, now we go to state. And it's exactly the same concept. So I'll call this counter, but you could call this whatever you want. We have number as data type. And again, you can give it the same name, or you can give it this name. Shall we start with, yeah, let's put a default value like 1 or 2. Doesn't really matter. And there we go. A counter where it starts at 2 for some reason. Let's create a view where we can use this. So I'll go back and I'll create another view. We'll call it counter, so it's really obvious what it's for. Again, blank view. What we should do now, we'll just add a button and we'll add a text component. All right, so it's actually pretty similar to my other screen. I'll add a text component and I'll add a button. Okay. Let's go ahead and connect my button. So the button, what's the button for? The button is what I want to do on this screen is every time I press the button, I want to increment the number that I'm going to show by 1. So let's just call the button what it's going to do. We need to, again, make an event. It's very, very clear and obvious what this event does, and very clear that I'm going to connect the button and say on increment, then To the user, it's obvious. You can even put an icon if you want it to be super obvious to the user. And now we're wondering, oh, how do I display the state value in a view? Now you see that there used to be only these two. Now we have this guy configured. All right. So the pretty name we made and the data type number. So how do you display this? It's the same as we did with inputs. So we made this grocery list. When I click and the data is displayed dynamically, we can do the exact same thing in order to use state. So again, and it has just a little piece before to indicate that it's something that will change. All right. So there, I just used it the same way as I would use the other stuff. So technically it should show 2, and we should see a plus button. All right. This is how you use it on the view. You just use it like you would any input. And so now we've created a view. Yeah, let's add it to the patchwork. The crazy app keeps on getting crazier. Let's move the things we made last time down a bit, make some space. And let's add this view to our spider web of views now. Counter. Here we go, ta-da. And again, I will add an extra menu item, counter. And you see it has this on increment, which we'll use later. All right. Next one. This has a few steps because there's a few things to configure, but it's pretty similar to how we set state. We'll need to get the last value, do some operation on it, and set the last value. So again, it's very similar to last time. State has the same 2 logic blocks. So get, set, and math. Math is how we'll do +1. And you can do many more things with math. Let me move these close to where they will be needed. Same concept. We do get state. Why do I need a logic block to get state? You might be thinking it's very convoluted. I should have an easy way to pass it from the view, or I should have an easy way to just use it. The reason is because editing something in state will update the view. We need to make sure that it's consistent. So if there are other actions, if you start building more complex apps and there are other actions triggering state changes, let's say, and the view is updating, you want to make sure that the logic you're triggering is consistent. So I will fetch the current value and I will do something with it and I'll set. If I were to somehow do it differently and just make it easily accessible from the view, I wouldn't have this same consistency, if that makes sense. And it also allows me to build actions without necessarily considering a view. So you could trigger an action somewhere else that fetches data, and then you could end up clicking and going to another screen, and then that value will still be able to be there on the view. So I'm going to align them a bit so I can use them. What am I going to do? I've put the logic blocks there. Again, I like to spread things out and have them before I use them. So we'll connect the get state to the view. And then again, we configure on the block itself what we're going to fetch. And then we'll move to connecting everything else. So first things first, when I click, or when the user clicks the increment button, we should get something from state. Get what from state? Counter. The reason you select it is because there can be multiple hundreds of state keys that you've defined, and we don't want to necessarily fetch everything every single time. So the next thing is we will connect it to the math logic block. So when it fetches the item, we go to math. All right. Ta-da. Connected together, math, and we go on to the next step. we configure the math block. So same thing as with our if condition. Some logic blocks have different configurations. So math is very vague. You could do a whole bunch of things, right? Addition, subtraction, multiply, divide, and then cosine, rounding, random number. We used this last time, random number. Yeah, whatever you want, but I'm just going to do plus because plus. There we go. And you'll notice that most logic blocks have, you see, you could either pass in values or you could set them. So we want to do a bit of both here. That's going to be interesting. I want to take the counter value, which is something that's going to change when people use the app, but I want to only add one each time. So I need to do a bit of both. And you just think about it in terms of x plus y. So add x plus y. I'm going to plus 1. So I'm typing, literally just typing the number I want on this side. And then I don't know what x is, but I know that it's from state counter, right? So again, I got the value from state and I pass it to x. And so now it's going to be x plus y. And the final thing is we set the state again. So now we have coming out from here a result, and we have what should go into set state counter, right? So you set result to counter, and that's automatically done. Now we will set the new number and update the counter. All right. That probably does it. Final step is not this step. The final step is connecting it together. Oh, and it is connected together. What am I saying? The view is connected to this whole suite of logic. Let's then refresh my app. All right, and counter, any view is there. See, 2. Instead of showing, nope, that's the wrong view. Instead of showing this, showing the number, when I click, it's just up, 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 up. So last time I showed you some logic where we had to go from one screen to another and back and pass values, but you can also just change values on a screen. It's probably the most basic example of state, and most apps that you start in other frameworks would also give you this counter example. So again, you saw that I have plus, I can do minus, so you could do a plus and a minus button. You could also just set the value back to 0 maybe. So yeah, you can do a few things. Well, why don't we just do that really quickly? Let me create a button. It says clear. And there we go. On clear, event, add. And then you connect the event together, linked together now. The button will clear. Now we have on our counter, we have on clear. This is pretty simple to just set a value. You just use this block on its own down here. And we'll set it to 0. Let's try that again. All right, counter. Now I have my clear button. Up, 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 clear. Up, 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 clear. See, it's instant. There we go. So that's a counter. And the next example I want to do is use that same concept of state, but to show and hide a component. But before I get there, I was wondering if you guys had any questions already regarding what I built here. You know, I went quite fast and there were a lot of things, but does anyone have anything they want to ask? All right. I will move forward then. This is great. We're going to use this concept to show a spinner or an activity indicator on the login screen, because that's a bit ugly right now. We have this concept for state of loading and loading text. These are state values that are always there, and you can use it. So whenever, so we take this, whenever any logic is run in an app, loading will be true. And whenever there's no logic running, loading will be false. So if we take that into consideration, when we are on the login screen and we're checking to be logged in, or we clicked on the login button, that will be true. And if I go to my login screen now, you'll see that there is something that was already here. And there's loading text. So loading text, we're not going to use it in this demo, and you don't necessarily need to use it. Sometimes it's nice just to know, but it's the title of the logic block that's currently running. So not relevant for this demo. This is the most relevant one right now, is this will be true whenever any logic block runs, and it will be false when there are no logic blocks running. So it can be really nice to combine with the login button itself. So I'll show you, again, similar to how we made the if condition, we can set a rule on a component that it will hide. So if this rule becomes true, the component will disappear. You can already see why that's kind of nice. The same builder, add rule, and then you see it's here. You can also use counter if you want. So you see how you could, if the counter reaches a certain value, you could remove a button. So that could be useful in the case you're building plus and minus and you don't want it to go below 0. You could remove the minus button when it reaches 0. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm saying that if any logic block is running, so if loading is true, we should hide the login button. Makes sense. So now you'll see it has edit rule instead of add rule. And what we'll do is we'll add an activity indicator just below. Activity indicator is currently not showing because it can either take a value and then show hide, or you could just set it to always show like this. You see? So we're going to do it this way. We're going to say that it should always spin no matter what, but it should hide when there are no logic blocks running. See? So I made the opposite condition. So technically they should never show at the same time. All right. Let me show you what that means. You saw it spin for a second, right? Let's log out. Okay. Obviously, there's nothing connected there. Webinar at appspotr.com. See, it's such a small thing, but it makes that login experience way better. So let me show you that again. We didn't have this before, and it felt strange because I didn't know if I was logging in unless I look at the logs of my browser or my phone. But now, as soon as I press this, you see, I see a spinner, and the user really feels like something is happening. So you can do that in a lot of places. When something is loading, show a spinner. You saw me the other day, I made a form to add a grocery item. You can do the same thing here. You can show or hide fields. You can show or hide buttons. You essentially build your own functionality. So on this counter page, what I was saying, when I reach 0, I could hide the minus button. So essentially making it so that the number can never go below 0. You can do a lot of really cool things like that. And that essentially makes views more dynamic. Right now, I've been playing with just simple data types. Well, simple data types, but just simple data types. But you could also store a whole list of items inside state, and you could play around with it. Add something to the top, add something below, clear the list, and it would automatically update the list. We use that for, let's say, if I wanted to build filter buttons at the top of this. So you have like an Uber Eats type app, and you have filters at the top to show only fruit, dairy, vegetable, then you could build a button that sets a state and that filters this list. And then it would be instant. It would be like, it would run as soon as you press it. There you go.